There is a moment when an empath stops explaining, stops defending, and stops asking to be understood. It is the end of a process that has been happening quietly for much longer than anyone realizes. When an empath goes quiet, the silence can feel sudden, but the decision rarely is. Long before the unanswered message, the shorter reply, or the calm expression, something inside has already changed. The empath has been watching, hoping, adjusting, forgiving, and trying to make sense of what the relationship keeps asking them to tolerate. They became silent because caring had begun to cost too much. This is where emotional intelligence changes the entire story. A person who is deeply attuned to other people often notices what is happening beneath the words. They notice the hesitation before an answer, the change in someone's voice, the warmth that disappears from a conversation, the difference between an apology and genuine accountability. And because they notice so much, they often give more chances than they should. They remember the good moments. They imagine what could happen if communication finally became honest. That hope can keep an empath in a relationship long after the evidence has become uncomfortable. They can recognize potential so clearly that they begin negotiating with reality. They keep believing that one more conversation might change everything, one more explanation, one more opportunity, one more act of patience. But emotional exhaustion does not arrive during one dramatic argument. It accumulates through repetition. A need is expressed and ignored. A boundary is crossed and minimized. A promise is made and forgotten. A difficult conversation ends with blame instead of repair. The empath tries again. They choose different words. They become softer, then firmer, then quieter. Each attempt costs emotional energy, and eventually the question changes. It is no longer, "How can I make this person understand me?" It becomes, "Why am I still trying to convince someone to care?" That question marks a turning point, because once an empath begins asking it honestly, the relationship is being evaluated at a deeper level. They are no longer judging one argument or one disappointing moment. They are looking at the pattern. Patterns are powerful because they reveal what isolated incidents can hide. Anyone can make a mistake. Anyone can have a bad day. But when the same emotional injury happens again and again, the empath eventually stops seeing it as an exception. What looks like distance is often the final form of emotional honesty after every softer attempt has failed. The heart may still remember the connection, but the mind begins preparing for reality. The empath starts grieving privately. They grieve conversations that never happened, closeness that never became mutual, promises that sounded beautiful but never became behavior. They may still smile. They may still answer messages. They may still show affection. Yet internally they are beginning to release the future they once imagined. This is why their silence can be misunderstood. From the outside, it looks like they suddenly became cold. From the inside, it may feel like finally becoming clear. They have already spent countless hours replaying conversations and questioning themselves. They have already asked whether they were too sensitive, too demanding, or too emotional. They have already tried to understand the other person's perspective. In many cases, they have taken responsibility for far more than their share. Then something unexpected happens. The need to explain begins disappearing. The empath realizes that endless explanation cannot create emotional capacity in another person. You can communicate clearly and still not be understood. You can express pain respectfully and still be dismissed. You can offer forgiveness and still discover that forgiveness without change simply creates another opportunity for the same wound. You can offer forgiveness and still discover that forgiveness without change simply creates another opportunity for the same wound. At that point, the empath stops spending energy where there is no meaningful return. They stop correcting every misunderstanding. They stop defending every feeling. They stop trying to prove that their experience is legitimate, not because their emotions have become smaller, but because their self-trust has become stronger. This is the part many people never see. Before the empath withdraws from you, they often return to themselves. They begin rebuilding the parts of their identity that became buried beneath emotional responsibility. They rediscover what peace feels like when they are not monitoring another person's mood. There's a quiet moment that happens when you look at your phone and realize there's no one you feel like calling. Not because no one exists, because no one feels right. There's a quiet moment that happens when you look at your phone and realize there's no one you feel like calling. Not because no one exists, because no one feels right. They rhymed, so emotional reaction. They may still love you. They may still remember you. They may still love you. They may still remember you. They may still love you. They may still remember you. They may still love you. They may still remember you. They may still love you. They may still remember you. They may still love 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 you. They may still ask how many times they tried to communicate. Ask how many times they offered understanding. Ask how often they carried emotional weight that belonged to both people. The quiet you are seeing may be the final chapter of conversations you never fully heard, and that is the paradox. Silence can look empty, but sometimes it is filled with everything that was never said because it had already been said too many times. The empath does not always leave when they stop loving. Sometimes they leave when they finally understand that love without reciprocity is not connection. It is exhaustion wearing the clothing of devotion. And when they finally choose peace over that exhaustion, their silence is no longer a question. It is an answer. What happens next is often even more revealing, because the empath's silence is not simply about leaving. It is about what happens inside them before they leave. There is a psychological shift that occurs when repeated disappointment becomes predictable. The person stops waiting for the next apology, the next explanation, or the next promise. They begin expecting the pattern. And when expectation changes, attachment changes with it. At first, this shift can be almost invisible. The empath may still participate, but if someone cancels, they no longer immediately search for a reason that makes the behavior acceptable. If someone becomes distant, they no longer chase them for reassurance. Their attention moves away from interpretation and toward observation. That distinction matters. An empath can spend enormous energy trying to understand why another person behaves the way they do. Understanding becomes a form of hope. If there is a reason, perhaps there is a solution. If there is fear behind the distance, perhaps patience can make the person feel safe enough to come closer. Knowing why someone hurts you does not require you to keep accepting the hurt. This is one of the hardest lessons for empathetic people. They can see the pain behind someone's behavior so clearly that they accidentally make the behavior less accountable. They think, "I know why you do this," and unconsciously turn that knowledge into permission. They recognize the childhood wound, the insecurity, the fear of intimacy, the difficulty expressing emotions. They become so focused on the explanation that they lose sight of the impact. But emotional intelligence is not simply understanding another person's feelings. It also means understanding your own limits. It means recognizing when compassion has become self-neglect. It means knowing that you can care about someone's history without volunteering to become the place where their unresolved pain repeatedly lands. And this is where the quiet becomes powerful. The empath begins setting boundaries without announcing every boundary. They do not always give a speech. They simply change their participation. They respond when they genuinely want to respond. They stop answering every emotional emergency. They stop rescuing conversations that the other person keeps damaging. They stop turning someone else's discomfort into their responsibility. The endless patience is gone. The immediate reassurance is gone. The long explanations are gone. The emotional labor that once seemed automatic has disappeared. And this is often when the other person finally becomes interested. They may ask, "What happened to you?" But the deeper question is, "Why did you stop doing everything you were doing for me?" That question exposes something important. People sometimes do not recognize emotional labor while receiving it. They mistake consistency for obligation. They become accustomed to being understood without learning to understand in return. They assume the empath will always repair what becomes damaged. The empath's quiet creates a new reality because the old dynamic depended on their participation. When they stop carrying the relationship alone, the imbalance becomes visible. Suddenly there is no one translating feelings, smoothing conflict, excusing behavior, or reopening conversations that the other person allowed to collapse. This is why silence can reveal more than confrontation ever could. A confrontation can be denied, but consistent withdrawal communicates through behavior. The empath is no longer trying to convince anyone. They are acting according to what they have learned, and they do not need the other person to suffer. They do not need a dramatic apology. They do not need to prove that they were right. Their greatest victory is becoming emotionally free from the need for recognition. That freedom develops slowly. They stop minimizing what happened. They stop rewriting painful moments to protect the relationship. They allow themselves to say, "It hurt," without immediately adding, "But maybe they didn't mean it." They allow themselves to acknowledge disappointment without turning it into self-blame. This sudden affection cannot automatically restore trust. Emotional intensity cannot replace consistency. Promises no longer create the same excitement because the empath has learned to judge relationships by what repeatedly happens, not by what is occasionally promised. That does not mean the empath becomes heartless. Their empathy becomes more disciplined. They can care without rescuing. They can forgive without returning. They can understand without excusing. Self-abandonment says, "Because I understand your pain, I must tolerate whatever you do." The first creates compassion. The second destroys boundaries. And when the empath finally understands that distinction, their silence changes meaning completely. It is no longer a reaction designed to communicate hurt. It becomes a decision to stop participating in what repeatedly creates hurt. That is why the quiet can feel so final. The relationship may still exist on the surface, but the emotional contract has changed. And once they understand that, they begin walking away from the version of themselves that believed being endlessly understanding was the same thing as being loved. There is another stage that most people never notice because it happens before the empath completely withdraws. They begin testing reality instead of testing the relationship. In the past, they may have asked questions because they wanted reassurance. Now they ask questions because they want evidence. They are no longer listening only to what someone says. They are watching what happens afterward. That is, they remember the beautiful conversations, the moments of tenderness, the promises made during emotional highs. But when an empath becomes exhausted, potential loses its authority. Consistency becomes more important than intensity. A single beautiful moment can no longer erase months of confusion. One emotional apology cannot automatically repair a pattern of behavior. The empath begins noticing something they previously overlooked. The difference becomes enormous once trust has been damaged. The empath begins noticing something they previously overlooked. The difference becomes enormous once trust has been damaged. The difference becomes enormous once trust has been damaged. The difference becomes enormous once trust has been damaged. The difference becomes enormous once trust has been damaged. The difference becomes enormous once trust has been damaged. The empath may have spent years believing that emotional conversations were enough. They believed that if two people could sit down and speak honestly, almost anything could be repaired. But eventually they learned that communication is only powerful when both people are willing to respond to what they hear. You cannot communicate someone into accountability. You cannot explain someone into emotional maturity. And you cannot create mutuality by yourself. This realization can be painful because it removes the illusion of control. The empath discovers that they can control how clearly they communicate, how respectfully they behave, and how honestly they express their needs. But they cannot control whether another person listens, changes, or reciprocates. Once that truth settles in, the urge to keep trying begins to weaken. They stop asking, "What can I do differently?" They begin asking, "What is this relationship consistently showing me?" That question creates clarity, and clarity often feels strangely calm. There is less urgency, less emotional chasing, less need to receive an immediate answer. The empath may still experience sadness, but the sadness is no longer mixed with the frantic belief that they must fix everything before it is too late. Because internally, they have already accepted something. Maybe the relationship will not become what they hoped. Maybe the other person is not capable of giving what they need. Maybe love exists, but compatibility does not. Maybe forgiveness is possible, but trust cannot be restored without sustained change. These realizations are not dramatic. They are quiet because they have been earned through experience. This is also why an empath's final withdrawal can be so difficult to reverse. The person on the other side may think the solution is to become intensely affectionate again. Because anyone can change for a day, trust is rebuilt through repetition, and the empath has learned to pay attention to repetition. This is where their emotional intelligence becomes discernment. They no longer confuse someone's potential with their pattern. They no longer confuse chemistry with safety. They no longer confuse being needed with being valued. That distinction can transform a person's entire approach to relationships. For years, the empath may have believed their greatest strength was their ability to understand people. Eventually, they realize their greater strength is deciding who deserves access to that understanding. Not everyone who needs empathy has earned intimacy. Not everyone who tells you their pain is entitled to unlimited access to your energy. And not everyone who loves you knows how to love you well. These truths can feel harsh until you understand what they protect. They protect the empath from turning compassion into obligation. They protect their nervous system from constant uncertainty. They protect their identity from becoming organized around someone else's emotional needs. And most importantly, they protect the possibility of healthy connection in the future. Because an empath who never learns boundaries can eventually become resentful of the very sensitivity that once made them compassionate. They can begin thinking, why do I always give so much? But the problem was never their capacity to care. The problem was giving without discernment. Healthy empathy has boundaries. It says, I can understand you without abandoning myself. It says, I can hear your pain without taking responsibility for it. It says, I can forgive you without pretending nothing happened. It says, I can love you without remaining where I repeatedly lose myself. And once an empath reaches this understanding, their silence becomes different from the silence they used earlier in the relationship. Earlier silence may have meant, please notice that I am hurting. Later silence means, I have noticed what this is doing to me. That is the transformation. The empath stops waiting for someone else to confirm what they already know internally. They stop needing permission to leave. They stop requiring a perfect final conversation. They stop believing closure must come from the person who caused the confusion. Sometimes closure is recognizing that you already communicated enough. Sometimes closure is sometimes closure is waking up one morning and noticing that the relationship no longer controls your emotional weather. You can think about it without falling apart. You can remember it without wanting to return. You can care about the person without needing access to them. That is emotional freedom. And this is why the empath's quiet can be misunderstood as coldness. The person watching from outside sees reduced emotion. They do not see the years of emotion that came before it. They see the final calm, not the storms that produced it. They see the closed door, they see the silence, not every conversation that came before it. So when the empath finally becomes quiet, understand what that quiet may represent. It may represent the moment when emotional intelligence stopped being used to understand everyone else and finally turned inward. The empath begins asking a new question. Does this relationship allow me to remain myself? And if the answer is consistently no, something changes. Not because the empath stopped caring, because they finally realized that caring about someone else should never require abandoning themselves. And then comes the final stage, the stage that makes the silence feel irreversible. And if the answer is consistently no, something changes. And then comes the final stage, the stage that makes the silence feel irreversible. They measure it by what it repeatedly becomes. This is where attachment finally gives way to alignment. They stop asking whether the connection can survive and start asking whether they can remain healthy inside it. That question is not selfish. It is necessary. For a long time, the empath may have believed that leaving meant giving up. They may have associated loyalty with endurance, compassion with patience, and love with staying through almost anything. But there is a difference between commitment and self-erasure. Commitment requires two people moving toward the same relationship. Self-erasure requires one person becoming smaller, so the relationship can continue. And they begin to understand that peace is not the absence of love. Sometimes peace is what remains when love is no longer being used as an excuse to tolerate instability. They discover that a quiet life can feel unfamiliar after years of emotional turbulence. At first, the calm may even feel strange. There is no message to decode, no argument to replay, no mood to monitor, no emotional emergency waiting to be solved. Then they realize how much energy they have recovered. Their mind becomes quieter. This is the part people often misunderstand. The empath is not necessarily becoming less emotional. They are becoming less emotionally dependent on chaos. And that is a powerful distinction. When someone has lived in a relationship where every emotional shift required interpretation, stability can initially feel almost boring, but eventually boring becomes peaceful. Predictable becomes safe. Consistency becomes attractive. The empath starts realizing that healthy love does not require constant analysis. They want affection that does not disappear whenever conflict appears. They want boundaries that are respected instead of challenged. They want emotional responsibility to move in both directions. And once they understand this, they become much harder to impress with temporary intensity. A dramatic apology may touch them, but it no longer determines their decision. A sudden wave of affection may feel familiar, but familiarity is not proof of safety. Promises may sound beautiful, but promises are no longer enough. The empath has learned to watch what happens after the emotion fades. That is where character becomes visible. If someone truly wants to rebuild trust, they will not demand immediate access to the old version of the relation fades. They will understand that trust has its own timeline. They will show consistency without demanding applause. They will respect boundaries without treating them as rejection. They will accept that forgiveness does not erase consequences. And if that consistency never comes, the empath does not need another argument to justify leaving. They already know. This is why the final silence can be so peaceful. The empath is no longer trying to win a case. They are no longer collecting evidence for someone else's approval. They are simply responding to reality. And reality has become clear. The empath does not have to rewrite history to move forward. They can honor what was good without pretending what was painful did not happen. This is emotional maturity. It allows two truths to exist together. I loved you, and I cannot keep living this way. I understand you, and I still need a boundary. I remember the good, and I accept that it is over. These contrasts are not contradictions. They are evidence that the empath has stopped thinking in extremes. They no longer need the other person to become a villain before they can walk away. They only need to recognize that the relationship no longer supports the life they are trying to build. They no longer, not because every question has been answered, but because every answer that matters has become clear. The empath finally understands that closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes it is a decision made quietly, repeated daily, and protected through boundaries. Sometimes closure is simply refusing to reopen a door because you finally understand why you had to close it. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: an empath does not become powerful by becoming less caring. They become powerful by their willingness to forgive was never what destroyed them. The refusal to learn from repeated patterns was. Once they understand this, empathy becomes a strength with purpose. They can still notice pain, understand silence, and recognize what another cannot say. But they notice themselves too. They hear their exhaustion. They respect their limits. They stop asking how to make this work and begin asking what kind of relationship allows them to remain whole. That question changes everything. The goal was never to become cold. It was to become wise enough to know when closeness is healthy and when distance is necessary. If an empath has gone quiet, remember that silence may have begun long before the words stopped. It may contain years of effort, disappointment, reflection, grief, and acceptance. By the time you notice the quiet, they may have answered, "Can I stay here without losing myself?" Sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes that quiet is not the end of love, it is the beginning of self-respect.